All right. As you come back and are taking your seats from your stretch break and so forth, I'm very pleased to welcome our next set of panelists who are fabulous, and they're going to have much to say on all of the topics that have been raised so far. And I'm very pleased to introduce, as the moderator of this panel, our adjunct professor of social psychology, and also, by the way, a volleyball coach. We've got our eye on you, Mary Jo Coltze. Mary Jo.
Hello. Thank you to all of our wonderful alumni, students, presenters, faculty, and other guests here with us today. I'm so happy that we're going to be able to talk about more AI and higher education topics with this panel. But first, I'd like to introduce our student monitor, Ms. Tanya O'Neill, who is a sophomore in human relations and a wonderful student in one of my classes as well. Tanya.
All right, good morning. I would like to give a warm welcome to all our esteemed guests, faculty, and students. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Steele of the American University School of Education. Her research focuses on education policy and the economics of education at the preschool, the 12th grade, and post-secondary levels. Her current research examines school-to-work transitions and the role of information access in students' college and career readiness. Her recent article entitled "To GPT or Not GPT: Empowering Our Students to Learn with AI" suggests that faculty need to move from fearing AI to teaching students how to leverage it as a tool that they question and critique, advancing their own comprehension, research, and composition skills in the process. I also have the honor of introducing two outstanding Trinity faculty members. Dr. Cynthia Greer is the Associate Professor of Counseling, and she is the founding director of Trinity's Trauma-Informed Education Project, funded by Kaiser Permanente. Dr. Greer will address how human beings can live a life of purpose with artificial intelligence. Dr. Prem Misir is an adjunct professor in Trinity's public health program. Dr. Misir has written extensively on issues of racial and social equity in public health. His talk will focus on an ethical and human-centered design into the development, deployment, and use of AI-driven interventions in healthcare. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Jennifer Steele, Dr. Cynthia Greer, and Dr. Prem Misir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am so grateful to President McGuire and to all of you and to the opportunity to be on this panel today to talk about what I think is such an exciting and also important and timely topic regarding AI in higher education. So I do teach at American University. I've been there since 2014. And in the past, I was a high school and even started my career as an elementary school teacher. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and today I'm focusing on higher education. With my talk is called "The Opposite of Artificial is Real," and I'm going to talk about what I mean by how we need in higher ed to get real about artificial intelligence. So I start with an image from the horror film that came out earlier this year called Megan. Raise your hand if you've seen Megan. Okay, just a few, and I have to say my daughter loves horror films. She's 12, and so that's how I ended up seeing this film. But Megan is a murderous robot doll, kind of along the lines of Chucky, which is my hero. But Megan is a really interesting avatar of artificial intelligence because she is, Bryce Hall used the word this morning, dazzling. Megan is dazzling. She is brilliant because she is charged with taking care of a little girl who is stricken by grief. And Megan, as this robot doll, instantly reads all of the child development and child trauma research on the web and knows how to handle this child better than any adult, any human in this child's life, and is really skilled at taking care of a child, except that Megan doesn't understand she has other responsibilities in the world, such as not murdering people. So Megan is very single-minded in taking care of this little girl, doesn't realize other human values. So she's brilliant, but she is extremely, extremely limited. And I think that's important to bear in mind as we think about how to utilize AI and make it a tool and not have it take over from us, not literally, but in an economic sense. So when I say we need to get real in higher ed, I mean we need to be realistic, equitable, adaptive, and we need to show leadership. So realistic, because as we heard this morning from President McGuire and from Bryce Hall, it is here. It is already part of so many tools that we use, and it's going to get better. So we have to understand how it works and understand how to leverage it. We have to be equitable, because if you're a person who delegates, AI is very powerful to you because now you don't have to give that work to a human. Often you can give that work to AI, but then who's not getting opportunities to earn a living and opportunities to gain new skills? Humans. So this is a threat to people as they kind of grow up in their careers. It is a competitor potentially with humans. We have to think very responsibly about that and think about who, as President McGuire said this morning, who is at the table and who is learning to leverage AI as a tool. We have to think importantly about equity. We have to be adaptive because it's changing all the time, and we have to learn how it works so that we can keep up with it and think ahead of it. And then finally, we have to show leadership in terms of how we have to show leadership because we're in higher ed, and it's our job to think about these things, and we have to prepare students to lead, putting human well-being at the forefront. So AI does feel like a new threat because in some ways, as Bryce said, it is a continuation of problems that we've already seen with bias and misinformation. The bias that exists in the world is perpetuated by AI, and misinformation already exists in the world, and AI is simply mimicking it, but AI can do it very quickly. So that is a danger, and there are other dangers. For us in higher ed, there's a danger of plagiarism. It makes it harder to measure what students know. We have to think in new creative ways about measurement. It raises questions about information ownership and copyright. But these are questions that we want students to think deeply about. We want students to think about, what does it really mean to own intellectual property? What do we mean when we talk about plagiarism? I had a colleague who said yesterday in a meeting, president of our faculty senate at AU, he said, well, I'm going to be honest, I've never had an original idea. Meaning that, it's a very honest thing for an academic to say, I must admit. But meaning that we all borrow. But at what point are we borrowing too much? What does it mean to own an idea? What does it mean to own a piece of writing or an image? What does it mean to own our own faces, bodies? And so these are important questions for students to think about in a deep way and not just receive a punitive smackdown if they don't understand logistics of plagiarism in the 21st century. So we really want them thinking deeply. It is prone to reproducing human biases. And the one that I worry about the most, because a lot of my training overlaps with labor economics, is it does compete economically with the students that we're preparing right now. So that means we have to teach differently, and we have to teach for equity. And part of this is about rethinking the skills that we have always valorized. You know, we've always valorized, we used to valorize, and we still do sometimes, the ability to do arithmetic in our heads. And then, as President McGuire said, the calculator came along, and suddenly, the ability to do arithmetic in your head is not quite as valuable as it used to be because we have this tool. And I think the same can be true of quickly synthesizing a lot of facts from the internet and quickly writing something that adheres to some genre conventions and grammar conventions. So these things have been gateways, these have been barriers, these have been blockades for some students that have not had opportunities to learn genre conventions, writing skills throughout their K-12 careers because of inequities, historic inequities in our systems, our education system. So this is an important opportunity. If we teach students to leverage these things, we can actually empower students and break down some of these gateways and barriers, I would argue. But we have to teach students to understand how to leverage the tools responsibly, that they get things wrong. So what did they get wrong? And we need to understand this as well in order to be adaptive, because the things they get wrong now are not going to be the things they're getting wrong in 5 years, except some of them will be, because some of these limitations are intrinsic, because AI is not human. Others of these limitations are just limitations of the technology that will continue to improve. So let's think about the kinds of mistakes that AI makes. Bryce mentioned earlier, it cites things that are not real sources. This is true, and this came up again in the meeting I was in yesterday, about it makes up citations. And it does this not because it's mean or it's trying to trick you or it's malicious or it's a murderous doll. It is not. It does it because it's trying to mimic. It's like a baby, but it's trained on terabytes of data, as you heard this morning. It mimics, so it tells you what it thinks you want to hear, and it comes up with a citation that sounds plausible because it sounds like something that really does exist, but it's a little bit different. And that's what generative AI, text-based AI does. So it makes lots of embarrassing mistakes. It makes up false facts that sound plausible. It doesn't know which words start with the letter A. So I gave it a question when I came up with the acronym REAL. I said, what is a word that means innovative or enterprising and starts with A? And it was so happy. It said, certainly, here are some words that mean innovative and enterprising and start with A. The only problem is that 3 of them do not start with A. So that's embarrassing, and it's very easy to see that that's an obvious mistake, but it does ridiculous things. So Bryce said this morning, it's like a toddler in some ways, and that's right. A toddler, a kindergartner probably would not have made this mistake, but AI does make this mistake, which means not that it's evil, not that it's bad, it just means it's limited, and we need to understand why it's doing this and how it works. It works because it's thinking probabilistically of what comes next in a phrase, in a paragraph, in a list, in a type of argument, in a type of genre, and it's mimicking what other people have written in other circumstances about that thing. And it's drawing on huge databases of data. So it doesn't, when I tell my students use AI to understand this difficult research article I just assigned to you, it can parse some of it, but it mistakes the literature review for the findings, and most importantly, it doesn't understand the graphs and tables. And that's what I'm teaching students to do. So in a way, I empower my students when I tell them that, you need to be the grown-up in the room with AI, because AI is making very naive mistakes. And your job is to be the metacognitive adult that is thinking, how is it making these mistakes? Where is it getting this information? And let me fact check this information. At the same time, AI is fast. It can read that article much faster than we can read it. It takes me, to read a difficult article that I assign to my students, takes me several hours to get a good handle on some of these articles. And AI does it in 15 seconds. So that's a huge disparity. And so that's how we leverage it, but we have to leverage it with our eyes open, knowing that it does ridiculous things. So it also it's not great yet at writing computer code. It makes silly mistakes, but that will continue to get better. And we can learn from the mistakes that it makes. What is it doing wrong? And can it parse this other block of code and tell us what the code means so that we learn from it, even though it can't do what we can do. So all of this, we have to employ leadership because AI will reconfigure inequities in the labor market. We already have a highly inequitable labor market, and the inequality, income inequality is growing in the United States and many parts of the world. So AI is going to supplant some jobs. And the new generation is coming after more complex, higher paying creative jobs that were previously insulated from early waves of automation in the manufacturing industry. So that moves us toward equity. It's bad if you're in a creative field, but it moves us toward greater equity in the labor market, except that the opposite force is that it is moving us away from equity by making it easier to replace simpler tasks, entry-level tasks, mid-career tasks. Those are the ones that are really easier to automate, even with generative AI. So this could still exacerbate labor market inequities. That's why we need our students. All of you who are students, that is where we need you to lead responsibly, to make sure that when you lead with AI, it is a tool that is prioritizing human well-being, not just of customers, not just of shareholders, but of workers, vulnerable communities around the world, and future generations, which means preserving our environment. It means that we as educators must cultivate interpersonal skills in our students, because those will rise in value, because AI can never replicate or automate things that make us intrinsically human. Including our human values and priorities. We need to find ways to continue to delegate to humans so that we can do cool stuff we couldn't do before, but not that we're replacing people. And we need to invest in humans so that ladders to opportunity, this is an image of a broken ladder, so that ladders to opportunity remain not only open, but equitable. And so, we have to remember that as we think back on generations of AI and pop culture, starting with President McGuire mentioned the other day in a conversation, how from 2001 A Space Odyssey, where the computer takes over the ship and tries to kill everyone, moving forward from that to this amazing, brilliant, murderous doll that is dazzling but misses the point of human life, towards something more like one of my favorites, Terminator 2 from the 90s, where the killer robot is repurposed to actually support and assist the humans in tasks that are a bit harder for them to do. So I will leave you with that.
Good morning. Good morning. Good. You won't break my soul. And those are the words, what are the words from who? Beyonce. Any beehivers in here? Okay, I'm not a beehiver. I do appreciate her music, and I especially appreciate this particular song of hers. So one of the first things I want to say is, I am not a robot, and I'm saying that because there are many people in this audience who know me who say, now I had Cynthia Greer get on this panel, because she is the least proficient in technology, and that is true. If it were not for the people over here who know me very well, because I'm usually, on speed dial to them saying, where's the Zoom link? And the other thing is that I am low tech because I have decided that is best for me, especially in terms of some of the technologies. I do not have Alexa, I barely use my cell phone, and the reasons because of that is because I do know the brain science. And some of that is what I'm going to address in my presentation. I teach a course in career and lifestyle development. And that part, lifestyle development, is really important because in the counseling field, the field moved ahead of us in terms of being able to state that this is, that life isn't just about your career, are the jobs that you have, but how you're able to balance that out and connect that with your lifestyle of your choice. And so automation as, my low tech part here, excuse me, I need to move the slide ahead, so. One of the things that we talk about in that course, I started the course out asking the students, who are counseling students getting a master's in clinical mental health counseling or school counseling, what are your competencies? What are your skills? And this is the first day of class. They've just gotten through a syllabus and kind of in shock. Then I'm asking them what their competencies are, and they're looking at me like, well, what do you mean? Then I ask, well, why should I hire you? And then you can anticipate what their question is, well, for what job? And then I go, but it doesn't matter for what job. Why should I hire you? What are your competencies and skills? And so we talk about what skills and competencies are. And also, because one of the things I always want to do in my teaching is give contextual knowledge. Because I cannot assume that because these students, many of them are younger than I am, that they even know what it was like before the computer. So they are introduced to globalization in terms of what Thomas Friedman in his book, The World is Flat, talks about. And he goes through that history in terms of what has happened over the last few years that has changed things, that has brought about automation. And one of the things that he talks about, one of the things that he talks about are the competencies for the future. And some of them, our previous presenter also talked about in terms of leveraging. But he talks about, that the competencies for the future will include being collaborators and orchestrators, for instance. He never addresses particular professions or job titles, because with automation, with technology, and now with AI, it really doesn't matter for the most part, because what you have to be able to do in terms of leveraging and collaborating is across the board. One of the things I do want to mention about, to kind of go back to one of the assignments for the students, is that they also have to watch the film Her. How many people have ever watched that film? Okay. And we just got through debriefing it last night. I just got through debriefing it with my students last night. And this film is in the future. Doesn't tell us a year. But the lead character, Theo, has fallen in love with Alexa. And the film was produced 10 years ago. I started using it 5 years ago to talk about, with students about automation and the changes in lifestyle, careers and lifestyle. The film is very disturbing. Every year that I use it, students still find it more disturbing. Last night they talked about how disturbing it was. If you have not seen the film, you want to see the film for many different reasons, especially when it gets to the part where Theo wants, and Samantha, the Alexa type entity, they want to have a sexual relationship. So that by itself, you should see. It does not work for many different reasons, because Samantha is not real. She is artificial. But anyway, going back to the competencies, When we talk about, as Friedman was talking about, what those competencies for the future are, they are listed. Did I? Okay, thank you. You can, without going in, taking time to go through all of them, I think that just by the name of what you see, that you can tell what we're talking about here in terms of passionate personalizers. That's my favorite, because what he is saying and what others are saying is that whatever it is that we do as humans, we need to be passionate about it. We need to personalize it, which is kind of the opposite of what AI addresses. As well as some additional context, we I guess one of the predictors of how we deal with AI is based on how we're already dealing with some of the technologies that we have. And we are not dealing well with that. In terms of our cell phones, our computers, the fact that we don't look up when we are walking because we are face down in our cell phones, getting ready to be hit by a car or whatever. And because there is a lack of knowledge among our general population, and this is something that we do need to embed in our courses, especially starting at the K through 12 level, is about brain science. When I was a psych major, we were given a cadaver brain. Now that was a little much, but it made a point in terms of how understanding the brain is really important in terms of our emotions, our whole body system, and all of that. And so we are being confronted now with issues about the impact of exposure, long-term exposure to our screens. We also, in terms of what we're going through right now, we are all experiencing collective trauma. Oops. Yes, we're all experiencing collective trauma. And because we just got through, or we're still getting through COVID, we now have moved from a pandemic to an endemic. And an endemic means that we're living with a pandemic, the effects of a pandemic, and that COVID is still here. COVID has had a major impact on marginalized communities in many different ways. The mental health status in this country is not very good. It wasn't good before COVID. Every time we hear reports, it seems like it's because of COVID, but we were in trouble before COVID. We were in trouble with the new technologies and how it was being used and how we really weren't paying attention to how we were using it. And then we were confronted during COVID with all of the social justice issues in terms of the disparities and the inequalities. Next slide. So the neuroscientists who helped in the invention of our cell phones in terms of its effects, I hope that all of you know that the neurosciences were brought in to make sure that when you hear that ping of your cell phone, that you pick up on it. And so we were already, AI, as many people have already said, has existed for a very long time. And so how we have been, our brains have been manipulated and how we have allowed our brains to be manipulated has always been there. So we've had brain hacking in terms of making sure that there are certain hormones in terms of this neuroscience that when we use our cell phones, when we're constantly on the screen, that dopamine, cortisol, all of those kinds of things that can initiate addiction. We also have not done a very good job about other things that we have approved of in terms of recreational marijuana. I will take that for example. I don't mean for this to be controversial, but the truth is that we have not had any good research about the impact of marijuana, especially on the brain. That research has just started, and when you look at the initial results of that, it is not looking very good. And especially in terms of the developing brain, the brain is not fully developed until age 25. And so when you think about what our young people have already been exposed to, we should be concerned at what they will be exposed to with other parts of AI coming about. We need to be paying attention to this. So, in many of the reports that have been released about the mental health status of our country, it has already been reported that we have high rates of loneliness, and this is with social media. This is with some of the new technologies, and that we are now seeing more isolation, more loneliness, as I said before, as well as some addictive behaviors. And as one panelist has stated, a part of what trauma feels like is having your agency taken away from you. And so my concern is, and as a concern as an educator as well as a counselor educator, is that when you already have people who have come through a lot of trauma or are suffering from trauma and high stress, that when people make remarks about we won't need human beings anymore, that sets another trigger. And that is not what we want, because first of all, that is not true. And again, as many people have said, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it is artificial. It is not human. And so part of this assignment that I give about the film Her is the question, what does it mean to be human? Asking the questions, do we want artificial intelligence to control our lives? Of course, the answer is no to that. Answering questions about what will be the quality of our lives. And another film, Barbie, I think people have seen Barbie. Okay. Barbie was about a lot of different things. Some people didn't see it. I saw it. Seen it twice. And one of the things that Barbie talks about in the film is that that they were trying to put her in a box. First of all, she was called a Jezebel. Now that alone should get your attention, because if this is the perception of what it means to be a woman or a woman who has presence and control. And again, in terms of talking about disparities and inequalities, Barbie's insight here in the film was right on target. We do not want to be put in a box. And so, again, what does it mean to be human? And so these are the kinds of questions that I do think that in many of our courses, that we should be asking those kinds of questions. We should not be assuming that, the people, the students, ourselves, really understand, have really thought about that. Because now we're being pressured to answer that question. So what we do know about artificial intelligence, as has already been said, in 1956, a group of cognitive scientists got together at Dartmouth College. That's interesting. Most people don't know that. To talk about artificial intelligence. And again, I keep saying artificial intelligence is artificial, it is not human. One of the things that caught me, that I found interesting as a counselor educator was when one of the scientists, creators of some of AI was interviewed, they said that AI hallucinates. Now, as a mental health professional, that caught my attention because I'm going, but okay, now this is really scary. I wasn't scary before, but I was scared when I heard that. And the person said, well, what I mean by hallucinate is that they make errors without apology. That's all we need to know, kind of, and understanding, where our place is, because it's already been said, that is what we want people to know. And so this acting out, in terms of the her movie where Samantha, the AI entity, is saying, you're great, really, getting Theo to believe that he's greater than what he is and all that kind of stuff. That's all made up. They're picking up on what they have been fed in terms of the data, what they think humans want to know. So in the next slide, in terms of skills and competencies, there will need to be some reskilling. 80%, it's predicted that 80% of the changes in the workforce will be because of AI, and lower paid jobs will be directly affected. So our public educational systems have not really prepared this generation and future generations for what is about to happen. Imagine that you are in some of these jobs that are lower paid jobs, and you're finally being hit, and you are recovering from this tsunami of COVID, racial unrest, and all of the things that have just happened within the past few years, plus any kind of generational or collective trauma that existed before in your lives. And you're now hearing that you are losing, that whatever it was that you did is no longer going to exist, but nobody's telling you what you're going to be doing then. And so that is what we should be addressing as educators in terms of getting this information out and being able to talk about it in a way that lets people to know what the ins and outs are, what the pros and cons are, and how they fit into the future competencies that we just got through looking at. Daniel Pink, who is a futurist, in one of his books talks about that the future is with right-brainers, and many of us are in this audience are right-brainers. And he predicted what the impact of automation was going to be. And this was several years ago that he started talking about some of these issues and really talking about, okay, so based on also what Friedman had already told us, so what does this world look like? What does this conceptual age, because that is what we have already moved to, is this conceptual age, which is why we are having the symposium, because we are conceptualizing, okay, so what is the future going to look like? As a futurist, he said that our focus is going to have to be on what human beings do best, really what most of the skills that many right-brainers already use. The left-brainers are the technology people, but the right-brainers, and we're all going to have to be right-brainers in some kind of way, whether we are prone to be more left-brainers or not, and that is in design, in storytelling, the power of the narrative. All of us have been storytelling up here in terms of giving you a narrative, how effective we are at doing that. He also used symphony, just like Friedman, in terms of orchestrating, being able to merge disparate parts together to make sense of it. These are all skills. These are all competencies. Play. He talked about play not only for children, but for adults, because he's saying we're getting to that point where the technology is going to be doing some of those kind of mundane kinds of things that we do not need to spend our time with anymore. And so therefore, we will need to be focusing more on leisure, but leisure and play in a very different way in terms of making sure that it's interactive and that it brings along community, that you are playing with other community members, not isolating yourself, which is what we have been we're seeing in some of the earlier technologies. So as we move to the next slide in terms of, okay, so where do we go with this? So we heard from, a couple of people, a futurist, and so where do we go with this? We go to agency, action, and activism. And so what we want people to understand is not to be controlled by to feel like you don't, have any agency. We want to develop self-agency in our students and with all people. To say that you can advocate for legislation, for some controls to be put in, but you can also, in terms of our educational system, we can demand that our educators start talking about these issues. And while in many schools that we are addressing 21st century careers, with that, we also need to be talking about what the skills and competencies are for the future. I'm running out of time and I'm going to stop here. I do have in terms of the storytelling as a competency, as a skill, I do have a reimagining of the Wizard of Oz that at some later point I would like to share that with you to get at some of the issues that we've already just talked about. Thank you.
Very good morning to all of you. I will be condensing pretty much what I have to say, and I hope I will be able to execute what I have planned to do. I think I can. One of the things that occurred to me some time ago in the South Pacific is there was a professor from the University of Brisbane that had a very lengthy paper on artificial intelligence. And I was kind of horrified when I brought all this stuff that it's capable of doing. And I said, my God, what the hell is this? It was not until a few years back that my work produced a program with the World Health Organization, and I was able to appreciate the nuances, the benefits, and of course the risks, and some some of the dangers of artificial intelligence. What I thought was useful, I looked at the Trinity Times and I found that somebody by the name of Taylor Hicks actually did a preview of this symposium, and I thought it was pretty good. And even today, as I speak here, there is Jeffrey Hinton, who is presenting a paper at the University of Toronto on whether digital intelligence could exceed biological intelligence. And it's pretty much that kind of perspective that I'm trying to present here. It's pretty general. I'm not drawing from any courses or anything like that, but from a public health point of view, there have been some very serious problems in that area. And largely because sometimes we get caught up with a lot of the new softwares that come, and we don't pay attention to the governance and the ethical or the humanistic aspects of AI. I would try to get this through as quickly as I can. Basically, in terms of learning outcomes, I think we should appreciate that artificial intelligence is part of the fourth industrial revolution today. And I would try to point out one or two, I can't go into all of it, the benefits and some of the abuses, which I'm very concerned about in the field of healthcare. And also explain the need for ethics, that is the AI ethics in healthcare, and what are some of the frameworks that have been presented to actually get into governing, if you like, this thing called artificial intelligence. You know, if you look back at Facebook, for instance, maybe one or two of the social media, you'll find that they never had at the very beginning point, the initial point, a lot of governance and a lot of ethical aspects involved in the framing and the execution of that particular social media. It's only recently, over the last year and a half, Congress has been paying a lot more attention to what they can do to govern or regulate the social media. But regulation is a strong term. Regulation is an empty word unless it's governed by the ethical and the humanistic aspects. I don't want to get into the definition now, so we move on with that. I think Bryce and my other two colleagues here have done on that. So, but basically one-liner on this, the next slide. The one-liner on this slide pretty much is basically artificial intelligence tries to mimic, if you like, the human brain, if you like. Think about what we do. We learn, we think, and we do. Well, if you think about AI, it's not trying to do that, it's doing it already. So AI is here to stay. Okay. I am very familiar and I pretty much like the work of Stephen Hawking. And he has some very interesting things to say, and I thought it might be useful to just read them out quickly. Our future is a race between the growing power of technology and the wisdom with which we use it, Stephen Hawking. And then he went on to say, success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last, unless we learn how to avoid the risks. And I know Bryce has been talking about risk management earlier, and that is very, very critical. In any program or policy issue that we talk about, risk management has to be part of that formulation. The power of AI in health and medicine, I will not go into all of it. I promise to go through, in a condensed way. But basically, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, Jeffrey Hinton, he's classified as the godfather of artificial intelligence. He spoke a lot about some new developments in drug development, if you like. And because of AI, the credit has to be given to AI. We are able to accelerate drug development and also to truncate or reduce the process and making it less expensive as well, much more effective. So there's a lot of work going on in the area of pharmaceutical products. And also some years back, I think it was around 2018, AI was used quite heavily. It was employed to identify some treatment for the Ebola virus in Africa. Now, I don't want to get into all the power behind medicine, but it's doing a lot of stuff. If you take in terms of the low and middle income countries around the world, AI has been, it's the same, maybe employed, it's already being employed to upgrade detection of tuberculosis through interpreting staining images. When you think of the third world or the developing nations, countries with limited resources, they don't have all the mechanisms to make things happen. And so when you have people living in very remote areas and so on, once the big data is there, we can reach them through AI in terms of looking at chest x-rays and so on to identify tuberculosis, etc. And even now as I speak, there is work going on employing what they call now PASS, which is really measuring the current state of COVID-19 in the United States. I will leave the power of BI in health and medicine. There are quite a few pieces, and I'll go straight to inadequate humanistic approach. Thus far, as we look at the world, totally not just the United States, there is no comprehensive international guidance on the use of artificial intelligence for health, in keeping with ethical norms and human rights standards. In other words, a humanistic approach is missing. And I think Trinity has done massive service to the world of AI in bringing this about today. This is very critical. Again, a lot of the benefits from artificial intelligence cannot happen in a comprehensive way where we touch all the bases without using a humanistic approach. And sometimes as you talk to people randomly, they say, well, I'm using chatbot, or I'm using this and I'm using that. But I think it's very critical that we understand the implications of some of these things and what they can do. So I would argue quite strongly and equationize the development of any policy with the inclusion, if you like, of a humanistic approach. And the thing is too about this, and this one here, all actors are involved. In any development of any ethical framework or tools or solutions, everybody's involved, not just the software engineer who designed it, but also the people who will have to deploy it, also monitoring it and assessment and so on will have to be done. So everybody in different areas have to be involved. And accountability will not be directed or should not be directed only at the software engineers. It's everybody who's part of that whole process must be held accountable for the AI. And one thing I want to mention quickly too, I just want to say, and I'm going to make 2 or 3 more slides and I'm done. I'm trying to be as condensed as I can, is that you know, you can't, when we talk about all these actors are involved, it's basically for accountability purposes. But you cannot have accountability without transparency. So transparency is a prerequisite for accountability. Let me get into some of the ethical frameworks, because there are a lot of them, and I can't do justice to them here. Perhaps one day, President McGuire will give me a chance to do a public lecture. We can do this. But let me, 2 more slides or 3 and I'm done. The President is looking at me, so I want to Okay, the thing is with the ethical framework, it's basically, there's a lot of work being done in the area. And a lot of the work in the research area has been done through systematic review of the literature. And if you look at this first one, the proposed ethics framework, they came up with something called SHIFT. And it was based on 253 articles over 20 years, between 2000 and 2020. The SHIFT is basically what it says there. It's an acronym for Sustainable AI, Human-Centric AI, Inclusive AI, Fair AI, transparent AI. I could go into all of that, but it would take up too much time. That's one of the solutions that, not solutions, I shouldn't call them solutions, but one of the proposed framework that has been introduced, to develop ethics and humanities or humanistic aspects in the execution, not just the execution, but the designing, the development, the deployment, the monitoring, and the assessment too of AI, all of that. So that is very useful. This particular one is a massive piece because to your extreme right, it tells you some of the important initiatives that came out of AI, and they're based on representative data. One of the things I should say here quickly is that, when we talk about AI, you're talking about big data here, okay? Without data, there is no AI. Now, big data is a large amount. Think about it in a simplistic way. It's a huge amount of data. If you think of the third world, I have spent quite some time in the developing world, and you talk about chest x-rays in some of these countries. Millions of chest x-rays have been used to identify, tuberculosis. You talk about millions and millions, and sometimes I sit with researchers and they say, you're dealing with a sample of 500 and a sample of 200. If AI really gets going, it can supersede that. And we can not deal with 300 in a sample and 400 in a sample. We're talking about millions. Of course, we've got to get our act together in terms of the humanistic and ethical framework. But I thought the big data is very critical. One of the reasons I'm mentioning the data is not just data, folks. You have to have what is called representative data. I didn't get a chance to go through the abuses in this AI in healthcare. And I could just tell you quickly, in the literature, the systematic review of the literature on AI and health, they have not touched too much on public health. They've talked a lot about health care in terms of the healthcare practitioners, medical people, and so on. But the public health field hasn't been touched too much. So we need to touch it a little bit, okay? But the data has to be representative. Just one quick thing about the problems with data is that we know from some of the statistics, and some of these things may have changed over time, African Americans spend a little less on healthcare compared to white patients, if you like. I want to be more specific. One of the problems that happened with the algorithms of AI is that it came up with a conclusion that blacks had lower needs because they were spending less. What it didn't take into the algorithms are shaped by the data. The data trains the algorithms of AI. And if you came up with that conclusion, obviously it's an erroneous conclusion. What that algorithm did not account for were the things like the insurance, the employment levels, the income levels, and so on. If you throw that into the equation, it is in big data, the conclusions will be different. So we've got to be mindful in societies, especially in health, public health, where there's so much health disparities here, racial health disparities. It is important that we pay a lot of attention to the representativeness of big data that are used in AI. And I just want to end it off with the World Health Organization, because I have a great affinity and a likeness for the World Health Organization. They've done a lot of good work. Of course, they've done some bad work too. Nothing is picture perfect. Everything is relative. But they have, if you look at the last slide, I believe, you'll see something there. There are about 6 principles. And I'm going to stop at this point. The World Health Organization came up with about six principles, I would call them. One is like protecting autonomy, promoting human well-being and human safety. That is like do no harm, and the public interest. 3, ensure transparency, explainability, and intelligibility. That's where transparency becomes critical, because a lot of times we talk about accountability, and there's very little attention paid to transparency. Foster responsibility and accountability. See, I put it after transparency there. And ensure inclusiveness and equity. That speaks for itself in the United States. Ensure inclusiveness and equity. And I could add there, if you have to do a little critique, and put the word equality there too. 6, and finally, promote AI that is responsive and sustainable. That's the key thing. We can set up a lot of policies, formulate quite a lot to execute, but if the policies are not going to work well, and that is it dies a natural death after a few years, then something didn't go quite right. So we have to think a lot about sustainability, and in the first ethical framework, sustainable AI was there at number 1. I really like to thank the Trinity University for giving me the opportunity of making this presentation, and I will take up President McGuire on this one. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To 1 minute to just wrap up because we heard so many wonderful thoughts today. I am coming from a framework of industrial, organizational, and social psychology, so that's psychology for the workplace, and I really care about what we can do for our students and how we can actually impact our workplace. So this is a figure that you will find, or my version of the figure, that you will find in any introductory management textbook, and it explains that at entry levels, technical first jobs, technical skills are very important. That is where AI is making the most changes. In my work as a volleyball coach, I've seen those changes actually change my job in how we collect data and analyze it. In terms of how our students are going to move through their work, next they'll go into management roles, frontline managers and middle managers, and their soft skills become important. You heard talking about human relations and understanding how to manage up and manage down. And that's going to be a little bit less impacted by AI. And then finally at the top are our visionaries, our C-suite level leaders. And those are going to be the people who are directing where we go with AI and what impacts we actually need to make. So I would implore the people who are actually out in the world doing their jobs currently to think about how AI is going to impact your job based on the things that we've heard today. And I would implore the teachers here, the faculty, like myself and the people at the table, how can you give your students the skills that they're going to need in their very first job to technically use AI? How can you incorporate it into your classroom? Can you have them do an outline of a paper using ChatGPT and then write the paper? Can you have them integrate in any way rather than just being afraid of it? Because we've heard a lot here from very friendly toward AI all the way through all of the warnings. And so that's my question that I would leave you with rather than asking the panelists.
Mary Jo, that's okay. I got a big cheer. Wow. There is so much to discuss. Here's what I'm going to suggest, because we're a little off time, but we'll catch up this afternoon. I'm not worried about that. If you have questions for our panelists, please come up and share with them. We're going to take a 15-minute break, okay? I'll give you 15 minutes. Lunch is in the back. You can pick up lunch. If you don't want to eat your lunch in here, social hall, I'm told the table's set up, and this is being live streamed. We're going to start with Dr. Brian Smith from Boston College, so don't abandon Dr. Smith, because he's going to talk about a lot of the ethical implications, and we're going to have a fireside chat up here at 12:20. We will reconvene at 12:20. Thank you all. Thank our panelists very much.